Hello and welcome back to Supernatural, where we're on a quest to make the extraordinary ordinary and unlock the greatness that lives in every human being. Thanks for joining us. Today we are talking about overcoming pain to find your purpose and becoming a hero in your home. My guest today is Jay Millar. Jay managed to overcome a difficult upbringing marked by domestic violence and alcoholism and went on to become an Army veteran, a first-generation college graduate with degrees in physics and an MBA, founder of My Virtual Dad and Confident Man Enterprises, offering invaluable resources for men looking to achieve success in all aspects of life, and author of Be a Hero in Your Home, the ultimate playbook for men to succeed at home, work, and life. Welcome to the show, Jay. Thanks for taking the time to be here.
Chad, good to see you again. It's good to reconnect with, well, I won't call you an old friend. You're a young man, but you're an old friend of my son. So it's good to see you.
Yeah, it's been great to reconnect, and I always appreciate your wisdom and experience. You've been a great mentor and someone just to sit down and have a conversation with. So I love your book as well. Thank you for sharing that with me. It's so well done, and we're going to get into a lot of what you cover there. But I want to start with you and your story. So give us a brief introduction of who you are and where you come from.
Well, you mentioned it. The thing that got me on this path is, I'm just a very fortunate man, very blessed, beautiful wife, 3 amazing boys that are grown, married, on their way, 3 amazing daughter-in-laws. But, getting here was a journey. I grew up in a home with domestic violence and alcoholism, as you mentioned. So when I was young, my parents divorced when I was 10. My mother remarried, but she remarried a man that was on his own journey, so really didn't have a fatherly figure in my life during my teenage years and my college years. And, just figured out things step by step. I didn't know what the plan was. I knew I desperately wanted to create a life different than in that which I grew up in. But I just didn't know how to get there, really. So I kind of took it step by step. I was going to go to college, thought I had some money, didn't have money, joined the military to get the GI Bill to get through that. Got a degree in physics. I had a step-grandfather who was a physicist. He worked at Los Alamos after World War II, built satellites that went to outer space and Mars, and I thought I'd be a great physicist. The problem was I wasn't a good physicist. So I got a job in technology as a software engineer and started building my career that way. And now I've been in technology sales for 30 years, and it's been a wonderful career. I love it. It's provided well for our family. But, along the way, I was, and I start my book with this story, proposing to my wife back when I was 26, and, I did a very terrible proposal. Despite that, she said yes. And then she gave this little rhetorical, question right after she said yes. She goes, "You ready for this?" And I flinched. And Chad, that's not a good time to flinch when, the woman of your dreams, the best person, most important person in your life asks you that. But unfortunately, I wounded her a little bit. She thought I was doubting her, but I was fully doubting me because, I knew I desperately wanted to be a good husband and father, but I had no idea what those relationships look like. I knew I wanted to provide for my family, but I didn't know how to manage money. My parents had filed for bankruptcy many times, each after the divorce. I knew I wanted to build a career, but I never saw that in my household. My dad lost job after job due to the alcoholism. And so I'm sitting there after the proposal, and she says, "You ready for this?" And I was like, no, I don't feel capable. I don't feel necessarily worthy, right? I don't know where this is going to go. I can't give you any promises because I can give you heart, desire, intent, love, but I'm going to mess those things up along the way. So, and then when I was, before the proposal, I had a little transformational moment in my life when I heard Lou Holtz. He was then head football coach at Notre Dame. And this is before YouTube, so I just happened to be walking by the television on a Saturday. They were doing a little interview with Lou before a football game, and he said what he tells his athletes is the three main things that will change you from where you're at today to where you'll be 5 years from now. And Chad, I internalize that to mean, for the rest of my life,
Yeah.
are the books you read, the people you meet, and the dreams you dream. And even though that didn't transform me, that planted a seed in my mind right then that, okay, I'm kind of upset. I'm kind of angry. And the world didn't know I was angry. I was just kind of angry inside. I don't have a dad, but okay, if I surround myself with good people, if I find good mentors, if I find wisdom in, them and in books that have stood the test of time and have, proven to be filled with wisdom, I can build my own. That's why I named my organization My Virtual Dad, because you create a tapestry of advisors where you can get good wisdom and you can figure out a path to go down to build a life. So, that's where it all began, and got married, and again had started our family, and like I said, I'm very blessed, very fortunate right now.
Yeah, that's amazing. Such an inspiring story, and it seems like you tell the stories in the book. You kind of build the book around your stories and your experiences, which I love, but it's kind of thing after thing that comes up, challenge after challenge. And I think it's so easy to kind of fall into this pessimistic mindset and become a victim to our circumstances. So I'm curious for you, how did you overcome this tendency to be a victim and use your pain to propel you forward? What kind of clicked inside you?
I think that's the $1,000,000 question. And for me, it was, again, there was that desire to create a life that was, exactly opposite of that in which I grew up, right? I was fortunate on my formative years and doing a little research. I've got a book recommendation for you about an epidemic of, I'll call it child abuse, or, growing up like I did with domestic violence and alcoholism.
Yeah.
And there's a psychologist, his name is Bessel van der Cook. And I'll send you the link to the name. He wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score. And he does a lot of research on PTSD, people who have been, in traumatic situations as young kids. But those formative years are so critical. And I feel very blessed that I felt love. I didn't feel any of the anxiety in, my first 5 years, right? I didn't know what was going on. I think my dad was declining at that time. He was probably an alcoholic my whole life, but I didn't really see it. And my mom protected me from it. And I was never physically abused myself. My dad took it out on my mom and my oldest brother, who protected me as well. But I saw it, and anyway, just the victim thing. I've got one sibling who hasn't been able to get out of that. I've got another sibling who, like me, said, "Hey, I'm gonna make this my world different, and I'm in control. I'm going to make this mess and, make it my message. I'm going to, take this and learn from it and grow from it. It's kind of like the growth mindset, right? So
Right.
and Chad, I think that's the question I'd love to ask you. I've got a growth mindset. How do you start that? Because that's a fascinating thing to me. People who grow up, nature versus nurture. You grow up in the same environment, but you come out with multiple outcomes. No siblings are the same, right? They're all different.
Right.
But I just think I had this intense desire to be different. And, also in my formative years, I grew up Catholic. My mom and my grandmother, I'm no longer a practicing Catholic, but, I got this view despite having a dad who was mean and, not necessarily nice, but I think I'm very unique, and I believed in a God that made me unique, made me special, has a plan for my life, and I've always had that peace that I'm here for a purpose, and I think that's a big factor into not letting the victim mentality take over and rule the day.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And we'll definitely get into your faith a little bit later, because I think that is so important, is an understanding of our greater purpose. But I agree, this really is the $1,000,000 question. And this is something that I often ask my guests is, how do you inspire change in people and encourage a growth mindset, because as we talked about, people can usually take one of two paths where you spiral into depression and anxiety and pessimism and victimhood, or you go the other way and you make something truly great out of your life that sort of comes out of your struggles. But you talk about your sibling, and these are the people where, I think we all have a desire to help and to serve. But the more I do this work, the more I realize it's something's got to click inside, and it's got to be internal, that desire to better yourself and better your life. And I'm continually seeking ways of how do we really extract this out of people. And I don't know that I have any good answers. To me, it's life is always pushing us to be the best we can be, and it's trying to squeeze us and really show us all the areas that we're not free. And so I think a lot of times we'll create pain for ourselves, and life will present us with a lot of struggles, almost as a friendly way to push us out of our comfort zone and get that thing to click. And so, I'm a believer that a lot of these painful experiences, they're brought to us for a reason. And a lot of times you can only really see the wisdom in it when you look back in hindsight to really discover what it's all about. But, I love how in your book you share vulnerably and you talk about these experiences you had as a kid, of being humiliated and embarrassed, and which kind of led to these patterns of anger, as you mentioned, unworthiness, low self-esteem. And this is a lot of the work that I do, and that really fascinates me with people, is how do we heal these stories at the root, subconscious level, so that they don't continue to run our lives. And it's funny, you just mentioned The Body Keeps a Score, which I haven't read it, but I've heard good things about it. And to my knowledge, this is kind of the concept behind it, is we need to process these traumas through the body, because they're imprinted at a cellular energetic level. And so in the book, you do such a great job of outlining how these patterns sort of form in our lives and come to rule us as we become adults. So can you just walk us through maybe how this showed up in your life? Because I think the key for people overcoming this is really understanding what's making them tick. And so can you help people to understand maybe how these patterns form?
Yeah, and I when I talk to men and women, I do a lot of mentoring for seniors coming out of college and veterans. And what I see is the first thing we talk about is kind of like, you are not alone. We all have a mess, right? There's nobody that escapes, I think, without some sort of, trauma is definitely a large, it's a broad scale, right? How much trauma did you overcome? But I think, me growing up, I just learned some things intuitively in my childhood home, right? I was a pleaser because I didn't want to upset anything. You walk in the front door and your dad's there, and you're like, okay, what kind of dad am I going to get? Is he going to be drunk and sleepy? Is he going to be drunk and angry? Is he going to be present? And he had moments of presence, I remember moments of presence with him, but so you just learn not to rock the boat. And I think that was the pattern that I had in retrospect, that I look back and probably caused me the most harm, because if there was a challenge, what I would do is, I would avoid it. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't take action. I would just put my head in the sand. And I tell the story in the book of my dad's last night in the home when he was really angry. I know my mom had let him know that she wanted a divorce, so he was not happy about that. I had a room in the basement, went down there and was trying to avoid things, and heard all this, ruckus and door slamming and pounding and yelling, and then my brother got home from, he was like a freshman in high school. He was 14. I was, he was 13 or 14, and I was like 9 or 10. And my brother just, he just tackled him to the ground, put him in a full Nelson, and gave my mom time to call, the cops came, and they came in and they took my dad outside and they checked on all of his kids, making sure they're okay. God bless the police force who has to deal with domestic violence stuff all the time. That's just heartbreaking. But we went over to a friend's house that night to be safe, a neighbor friend, and spent the night over there. And that family loved on me and my sister. My brother stayed home because he had a paper route and had to get up at like 3 a.m. to go deliver papers. So he stayed with my mom. I don't even know where my dad went that night. I don't know if they took him to jail. I have no idea. But I get home the next day, like at 9 a.m. And, Chad, I write about it in the book. We never talked about it again, right? We just buried it. We didn't talk about, are you okay? Here's what happened. Here's we're going to be okay, or we've got challenges to face, whatever. But we just had a pattern of not addressing critical issues. So my inaction was probably, I call it my biggest sin, up through a lot of my adult life. Even when I had a young family, right? I would avoid some things. It's interesting. I would take some things head on, providing and managing finances and trying to be a good husband. My wife and I took, marriage classes with friends and learned about our marriage and invested in ourselves there, right? But there was other more soft issues, more the emotional issues that I would just bury deep, and I wouldn't address, and I would feel shame and like I'm the only one that's going through this. It took me till I was 50 years old, and I'm 58 and a half now. It took me till I was 50 years old to just say plainly, I grew up in a home with domestic violence and alcoholism. It's not like I necessarily hid it, Chad, but to be able to bring that to the surface and just to acknowledge and accept, hey, that's the world I grew up in, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, those patterns, impacted me quite a bit. They still do. I still get triggered by things. I think, why did my dad think beer was more important than me? My mother didn't drink, but she medicated with avoiding things, and it was television, which was her thing, right? She would just get buried and sit on the couch and really not want to engage for most of her adult life, right? She just wanted to avoid things. I'm like, is TV more important than me? I know I'm not the best kid on the planet, but, that's that unworthiness that took a real long time to overcome, and faith helped with that for sure. Again, I got this juxtaposition of knowing that I'm made special and loved and have a plan for my life, and yet there's moments where there's triggers where I felt unworthy along the way. So it's definitely a nonlinear journey trying to overcome those things. At least it was for me.
Yes, definitely. And all these patterns, the avoidance, the procrastination, the overthinking, the anger, these are just defense mechanisms. They're our mind's best attempt to keep us safe and get our needs met. And like you said, I think so many times we think we're alone, but as human beings, we're all really going through different variations of the same wounds and patterns that we're being forced to overcome. And in the book, you talk about 3 core ones that you kind of see a lot, especially with men: insignificance, incompetence, and impotence or powerlessness. So can you talk a little bit about how these may show up in different areas of our life and how we might be able to work through these?
Yeah, kind of like the analogy of the macronutrients for the body, carbs, proteins, and fats, right? In our diet, how do we tune our physical body the best way? In our emotional body, and there's a study that I reference in there where the 3 main emotional components that men are looking for, significance, competence, and being powerful. Right. And I had a blend of those, in many ways I felt insignificant. Relative, and we'd all look back at high school stuff and we think, hey, everything was a big deal back in high school. And in hindsight, we look back and say, that really wasn't a big deal. Right.
Yeah.
So that's all part of the growth journey. But that unworthiness from, I don't want to say I wasn't loved, because I never felt not loved. I felt not loved, I was imperfectly loved, that's for sure. And I know I've imperfectly loved my own wife and children, but wanted to have that assurance that I was loved. And I just didn't, because my parents were battling their own journey, right? And the powerlessness, the impotence. I know too many men and women who have been abused and like sexually abused and molested as young kids. And I mean, you can relate it to the work life. If, you have a boss that, you can never do anything right, and they're just more dictatorial than in a partnership and letting you do your job, or, maybe you feel stuck in some way. That powerlessness, if you feel like you don't have control of your outcome, that's really gonna ding you in a harsh way. And then the incompetence or the competence, you want to feel like, hey, you're capable. You're a hockey player, Chad. There's nothing more than you wanted than to sit shoulder to shoulder with your teammates and for them to say, hey man, we believe in you. You're going to get us through this thing, right?
Right.
You're in the battle with us, and we trust you. We believe in you, and we know you're gonna be side by side with us. You can relate to that. I wasn't an athlete, but I know athletes have that strong sense of feeling competent, in their sport. So if you have those three things, I think that's just a way to look at the world emotionally, and you can kind of assess which one of these things is kind of my challenge. And then you can start to hopefully put together a plan around that. How can I address that? How can I talk about it? Sometimes it's with a counselor, a psychologist, to help draw these things out. And that's the book, The Body Keeps the Score. He's a psychologist. And, that book made me feel really bad, because there is an epidemic of children that have grown up and, their mothers weren't capable of caring for them, or their fathers weren't capable of caring for them. So they don't get the attention and trust and confidence and peace and protection that they're looking for. But if you look at it from these emotional sides, I think you can put together a plan on how to overcome those.
Yeah, and it's really interesting too how all these different disciplines start to tie in with like the nature versus nurture conversation. And I'm a big believer that a lot of these core wounds are really the drivers of our outward personality in a lot of ways, and everything forms as a sort of protective shell against really feeling these wounds and emotions again. And you mentioned the competence aspect with especially athletes. And I don't know if you've studied different personality systems like the Enneagram. I think the Enneagram is a really clean one. And I'm an Enneagram 5, which means my core fear is being incompetent. And so my whole life I built my entire world around being an athlete and being good at what I do and being competent, being valued. And once I hit college and that started to kind of go away and I hit that ceiling, it was panic and fear and terror, because this whole facade that I'd built was really starting to crumble. And I had to face those feelings of incompetence and really start to ask the harder questions, like, who am I? What actually brings me value? Where is my worth? And so I think for a personality like me, where my core wound is incompetence, it's very natural to do things like, get a bunch of degrees and get your PhD, become an expert in a very niche subject and sort of hide behind that. But I think in going the way that I've gone in business and putting myself out there on social media, it's like you almost butt up against all those really core wounds and fears that have to do with these core areas of insignificance and impotence as well. Because as you said, it's really a blend of all three that we're dealing with. But once you know what you're dealing with, you can sort of look at it like a puzzle, whereas it's less of a curse and it's just a challenge that you're working through, a challenge that we're all working through. And one of the things that I love about your story is you actually went back and forgave your past, particularly the situation around your father. A lot of times we can spend our lives running away from our pain and building our lives in a way that we never have to confront the past. But ironically, when we do this, we just keep becoming more of a victim to the past, and we spend our entire lives running away from ourselves. But when we have the courage to look behind us like you did, that pattern of pain can kind of end with us. And so you outline this beautiful practice in your book where you go back and you imagine your father, somebody who brought you so much pain, and you imagine him when he was 10 years old and what he must have been going through to get him to the point where he hurt you and your siblings and your mother. So can you maybe take us through this practice and tell us why it's so important to bring resolution to the past so we can move forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question, because I do think we all need to, in order to move on, you need to have that moment where you really dig into it and think about it and come to a resolution with it. And yeah, the technique and I heard this, I mean, you just read the book. The book was published in 2023. So I heard a podcast or a sermon, and, somebody who had gone through a similar event like me, and they said, hey, and as part of faith too, the forgiveness aspect of the Christian faith is one of the key things. I mean, it's one of the hardest things I think all of us have to deal with, right? And, not forgiving, what do they say? It's like feeding yourself poison, and, the person who wronged you
right.
doesn't get it. You're just hurting yourself by not forgiving. So that was one thing. Not forgiving, I mean, my dad was on his journey, and he passed 28 years ago, and he'd cleaned up. He was sick. He had some cancer, and we had probably the best conversations we had the last 6 months of his life because he was coherent. He wasn't drinking, right? So we ended on a strong note, and I was a little more graceful earlier. When in my 20s and 30s, I was really judgmental, like you just ruined everything, right? So, but. The technique was to, I mean, I thought of my dad as a 10-year-old. He grew up in a small town in South Dakota, near farms. He wasn't a farmer, but, I'm thinking of him going out and playing and being with his buddies and, trying to make friends and, do school. He was a very smart man. And I was thinking, he did not plan to be an alcoholic. I don't think many alcoholics plan on, and he didn't have a history that I can find in our family of alcoholism. He had a mom who had some mental challenges, for sure. She would probably be diagnosed with something like bipolar now. That's the biggest clue that I have. So he grew up in some challenges as well, right? And he didn't plan this, but, by the time he got to his 30s and 40s, he was fully in the boat. And I think I found some grace in that moment of, I think he did his best. He was going through challenges. He was building a family, trying to earn, and I think his thing was, this is back in the 60s and 70s, he thought he could ingratiate himself with his bosses and go out after work and have some beers. And, I think that's what got him hooked, right? Was trying to be a part of the inner circle or whatever at his job and trying to make friends that way. But it turned desperately wrong for him, along that way. So, but just thinking about him, he had a pure heart, a tender heart, I believe, at a young age. And, somehow he got off track. So if I went back and saw that, I said, okay. And I do. I have full forgiveness. I don't think I've told anybody this, so breaking news here on the podcast. I think, what if, God said to my dad, hey, I'm going to send you on a mission. I'm going to send you down to earth, and you're going to have big challenges. You're going to have, an addiction. It's going to take over your life. But the purpose of that is to create good things for others in the future. And so I've gone on those deep journeys to think about, there is always a bigger plan. Yeah. My dad's not the first to get caught by alcoholism. Unfortunately, he won't be the last. It's an epidemic. There's a lot of people that are addicted to substances. It's very powerful chemically in our body, of course. But he didn't plan this. If he was 10 years old planning his life, he would say, yeah, I want to do it different. But he just got sucked into it, day by day. And It got him really bad. It's ultimately what killed him. He died of cancer, but, his body just couldn't fight anything. He drank and smoked, a lot over his, 20s, 30s, 40s, and he died at 55. So none of us wants that, but some of us get caught and we can't get out.
That's right. And we talk about this element of forgiveness, especially within the Christian faith. And I think sometimes there's a misunderstanding, like it's this intellectual thing where it's just about, saying or thinking the thoughts like, I forgive. But I think what you're saying really is it goes deeper than this. And I'm with you that really the key to forgiveness is understanding where people are coming from, what they've been through, the traumas that they've had to endure. Because I think really it's that concept of like hurt people, right?
Yeah.
And when you really understand what people are going through in their inner world, you see that we're all just doing the best that we can do. And that the people who do the worst things and hurt other people the most is because they're the most afraid, the most scared, the most hurt. And that's why they lash out and do things that we would consider undesirable. And when we really come from that perspective, I think it shifts how we see people, not as these horrible monsters who are out to get us, but really as these souls who are on this journey with us and going through their own things. And I love that perspective that you shared of, what if your father was sent on a mission and that ultimately the things that he did and said would bring good things. Like, what if God said, you're going to have a hard time, but because of that, you're going to teach your kids important lessons. You're going to give them the opportunity to forgive. They're going to raise amazing children. They're going to touch many lives in the world. And so I think that's a really inspiring way to look at things, and something that I hear commonly with people, especially dealing with really difficult things with their parents, is they say once their parents pass, it's a lot easier to forgive and understand, and it almost like brings them closer in a way than they ever were when their parents were alive. So is this something you've experienced where, the passing of your father has brought some sort of closure and closeness that maybe you didn't get when he was alive?
I think there's something to that. Like I said, that thought exercise that I did of thinking of him as a 10-year-old. I don't remember exactly when I did that. I think it was after he passed. But like I said, we'd ended on a good note. He always tried as a father. He lived out of state. He moved back to South Dakota, and he would come out for my high school graduations, when I got out of the Army, when I graduated college, to my wedding. He tried, and I give him credit for that. He didn't just stay away. So I know he was trying. I know he had a desire, and he probably had a lot of shame in his body too that he was trying to overcome. But my mother passed almost a year ago, last December, and I'm grateful for my parents. And Tony Robbins, I think, said it, life doesn't happen to you, it happens for you. I am grateful for my parents, because if I had the loving, doting mom and pretend, I don't know, I don't like to go down the wealth path a lot, but we worried about money constantly. But if we had enough money and were provided for, and, you can have great outcomes with that too, but not having those things really gave me a desire. And that's why I've been mentoring and being part of men's groups for 30 years, is because I wanted to be on that journey. Back to that Lou Holtz quote, I wanted to surround myself with good people. But, I think I've fully forgiven my parents, and I'm grateful for them in my life. And I've never, in my 20s, I wouldn't say that. I was pretty upset about it. Like, hey, why didn't you do better? And I know teenagers can be very cutting as well, and I'd talk back to them and I'd say exactly what I thought, and I probably wounded them deeply as well as a child, right? But I think the forgiveness, it does grow over time, and I think it's grown with my mother passing a year ago. So I think that's real because I think it allows you to give a little bit of distance so that you can get a better perspective.
Yeah, really powerful. Of course, there's no perfect parents, but every parent is incredible. And I'm a believer that when we come to an imperfect place like Earth, we are really here to experience conditional love so that we can learn unconditional love. It's like we got to experience the opposite of what we want so that we can choose the other path, so that we can choose the path of love and making the world a better place and raising our kids in maybe a better way than we were raised. And I think that's how you really grow and evolve a species on a planetary level, is through our individual lives and our individual choices. So moving on to one of the other concepts in your book, one of the big lessons that you teach is dream big and you are worthy. And I think you really nailed it here, that in order to dream big, we have to know our inherent worth. If we think that we're these small, helpless victims, we'll set our aim far below what we're truly capable of. And it feels like the odds are against us with this one, because the whole world is telling us that we're not good enough, you're not beautiful enough, you're not rich enough, you're not successful enough. So how do you teach men to find their inherent worth in a world that tells us we're not enough?
You know, I when you and I had coffee, a couple weeks ago, and we talked about this, and I gave you a copy of the book. I did this with you. I mean, I signed the book, and it's not about me or the book, but I said, I love you, I believe in you, and I'm proud of you.
Yeah.
With my three boys, two of them are engineers, one's still an aspiring athlete. I say that all the time. I love you, I believe in you, and I'm proud of you. And I don't do that like it's a participation trophy. And, that's just dad saying that because dad feels he has to say that. I try to use that kind of like a knife cutting through the world, that's not beating them down, but the world is challenging. Work, you have challenges, you have struggles, you have, it takes a lot of your time. You're always having to perform. You're always having to, deliver and do what you're trained to do. And I want to be the antidote to that. And that's what I say to men is, you are worthy. And it goes back to the faith. I do believe through my faith. I'm like, the world might not say I'm worthy. I was probably, not near last in my class, but I was not voted most likely to succeed in my high school class, Chad. And I had good teachers, and I had people who thought, Jay's not going to amount to much. But when you hear that, and Chad, think of a teacher or a coach with you who really believed in you. That's a game changer, right? And that's what I try to bring with men that I meet is, the first step, and you talked about identity with an athlete, right? That's a big deal. Like, who am I? What am I all about? What do I stand for? What's my why? What's my purpose in life? And when you're an athlete, you've just got the blinders on. You're like, I've got to train. I've got to stay healthy. I've got to practice. I've got to deliver. I've got to have all those instincts and skills that you're trained to do just to react in the moment during a game, right? But after that, the blinders come off, and you're like, then you have to figure out, okay, who am I and what am I all about? And I think a lot of men can, especially in the day of phones and interrupt-driven social media, and always not being able to sit and think. I think you just have to. One, I say to everybody, you are worthy. God made you special. There is something that you are here to accomplish. Mm-hmm. And you got to tap into that. You might not know the answer now, but, in the programs and that's the purpose of the book, is to create confidence. Like, I do have a plan, and it's a high level plan for your life. Like, here's how I can build, when I proposed to my wife, I knew how to launch a nuclear warhead. I had a degree in physics. I was trained as a software engineer at the time. And I kind of got angry, or more frustrated is probably the word. I'm trained to do all of these things in the world. But when I walk in my own front door, I don't know what to do. What's my plan for that? And that's why I named the book, The Ultimate Playbook for Men to Succeed at Home, Work, and Life, is because there's not a lot of training. It's kind of the luck of the draw. If you have a family or a father, an uncle, a grandfather, or something like that as a man to watch and to learn from, and they teach you some wisdom and some good things. That's awesome. But it is the luck of the draw. And with divorce rates what they are, and there's stats that, young, children, boys and girls are growing up in homes without a father, well, where are you going to learn those things? Right? So the book is all around creating competence. Like, okay, I do have at least a high level plan. Connection, I love doing cohorts of groups together so people can share vulnerability. They can have friends. They can have a support system. And then the third thing is safe. So confident, connected, and safe. And safe is the vulnerability thing, to say, I don't have it all figured out. And as men, we're really not trained for that either, Chad, right? You have to go in and you have to pretend in many ways like, yeah, I'm good. You don't want to tell anything. That's why I lead off every chapter of the book. You call them my stories. I try to share from a place of vulnerability where I screwed up. I mean, every chapter is where I screw up, what I learned, and, a better way forward. I mean, those are kind of the three, that's the framework for each chapter. And I want to lead with vulnerability. So to set an example for men to say, yeah, I don't have it all figured. And it works for women as well. My nieces are really upset at me. They're like, Uncle Jay, this book is good for women too. But we talk about things like struggles with pornography and addiction and things like that, I have a lot of conversations with men about, because those are the things that will trap men and, bring, they're feeling insignificance and impotence and, incompetence. They're trying to fill those voids, is what things like pornography do, and addictions and substance abuse do. So, hey, I love you. I'm proud of you. I believe in you, because I want to help model being that person, because I really do believe. And when I say that, it is not just me saying it to you, to my kids, or to everybody else I come across. I believe that in my soul, that, I do love every person I meet. I do believe in them. And, I am proud of them for being where they're at in their journey at that time.
Wow. Yeah, so really cutting through the noise of all the programming around us that tells us that we're not good enough and not worthy, because we are. And as you said, we're all created with a unique fingerprint and unique contributions to make. And we may not always feel worthy, but I love what you said about act as if you were, and then just see what happens and see where that takes you in your life.
Yeah.
That's incredible. And this kind of, when you talk about this brings up something else for me, which is this mental health crisis that we see in today's world. In large part, I think, due to exactly what you're talking about, is not being able to have these vulnerable, open conversations and process these difficult experiences. People feel alone. They feel like nobody can relate to their struggles. And what we suppress just grows to the point where it becomes this unbearable burden. But really, as humans, we're all going through these similar challenges in the path of our personal growth. So how do we really create a culture where it's safe for men in particular, but really all people, to be vulnerable and share about our weaknesses, our fears, our struggles?
I think that, and Brene Brown talks about it, courage. Courage is leading with vulnerability, right? And saying that you don't have it all figured out. It's not like you're putting on a facade, pretending that that you do have it all figured out. And there's confident leaders, and there's, that lead with vulnerability, and there's people who don't lead with vulnerability. And I think those are two wildly different things. So I think just modeling it, I think courageous, what I would say to anybody is have a friend or two. You're not gonna be vulnerable with absolutely everybody, but work at it like you would work in the gym to get stronger or to anything. Try to develop that muscle where you have a trusted relationship where you can say, you know, I've been struggling with this. I don't have it all figured out. And I think leading with that, every time I've ever done that, Chad, somebody, you know, gives me the me too kind of thing. You know, I'm glad you said that, because I've been feeling the same way. Now, I didn't know how to articulate it. I know it's in there, you know, and it goes, you know, even with the forgiveness thing, the things that there's, you know, we're all thinking in our head, and they say the longest distance in the world is between your head and your heart. And the more you can try to think with your heart a little bit, I think when I lead with vulnerability, I tap into something in their heart. They're like, you know, that's something I've felt, or their gut, right? That's something I've felt. That's something that I've known, but I haven't been able to articulate that. That's why I'm such a big fan of reading biographies and, you know, of folks who've overcome struggles, and, you know, books like The Body Keeps the Score and things like that. Is it helps me create words that I know are in my heart and my gut for my own life. I don't steal them, I borrow them, and I'm like, my story's kind of similar. And I think if you know, I would encourage everybody, if you're feeling something, even if you don't know how to describe it. I mean, my wife will tell you this. If I get upset or triggered by something, there's a lot of times I'll say, honey, something's wrong. I don't know how to express it. I need to go think about it for a little bit, right? Because
that's great.
I don't want to just come back with like a sarcastic comment or something that's cutting or biting or hurting, you know. I think we just need to be trained to try to bring some of these feelings, you know, and I do journal some. I used to journal a lot more, but when you write things down, it does help bring more of the things from your heart and your soul to the surface, than just continuing to have things rattle around in your head.
Yeah, those are excellent, very practical takeaways. Great advice. Thank you for that. And something else that we're seeing in our culture today, in addition to the mental health crisis, is also this sort of blurring of lines between gender roles, the attempt to make men and women more or less the same. Can you talk a little bit about this and what effect you see this having on people?
Oh man, I could talk. I've thought so much about this, and you know, I mean, if you go back 120 years, right? And I believe in diversity of everything, you know, genders, of, you know, faith, of races, of, you know, cultures and backgrounds. I do, because I think we get a great worldview when we get a melting pot of ideas to try to improve our life. But 100 years ago, men, you know, provided and protected. You know, think of wars, think of farming and working in steel mills and things like that, and women provided, or women were at the home working with the family. The danger that men had 100 years ago was in battle and wars and the danger of their profession, right? Women's danger was giving birth, right? That was their courageous moment, because, you know, things weren't like they are now with a lot of medicine and safety and preventative, you know, care and things like that. But now those lines have blurred quite a bit, you know, with dual income homes and things like that, you know, families having discussions around, I mean, there are more stay-at-home dads, but usually when the dad still is the provider, there's still, I know so many women that are the main provider in their home, but I think you can still keep, I mean, I think intuitively we're very different, you know, Chad.
Yeah.
You've got a sister, right? You know, I mean, and your parents, and I think young boys have a need for that physicality, right? The adventure, the running and playing, the danger on the playground, you know, when you're really young and things like that, in a different way than girls. I'm not trying to do a broad brush, but I'm thinking that there are definite, you know, gender lines that are very helpful and very helpful to fulfill. That men can do some things and they can fill some emotional needs in different ways than women can, you know? I mean, my kids will call my wife if they're, struggling with some things, and they'll call me if they're struggling with other things, right? And so I think we all are valuable. We all are vulnerable. The dual income thing, I think, is the thing that blurs things the most, where there's dual income providers. And, some men have lost their way on that topic alone. Like, programmatically over the last multiple centuries, right? Men have had to provide and protect. And now this is a very new thing in our world. Humanity has never had to deal with this in the past. I mean, in the Bible, there's plenty of women that work and do things outside of the home. It's not like they didn't work, but that wasn't their primary objective at that time. I don't know if I answered your question there, but I think it's interesting that you have to have a conversation around it with those roles, because sometimes men can feel lost that they're not providing, and protection isn't what it used to be, at least in the United States, right? Having to go out and protect your family. Yeah,
no, this is great. And especially a topic with dual income, because I think there is this push for, it's, if you're a woman, it's good to be exec or boss babe. And some women even go to the point where it's like, I don't need a man to take care of me. And I think, as you said, this makes a lot of men feel diminished and emasculated. Like, okay, well, how do I contribute in this relationship? And so what do you tell men who are maybe in this situation of how to fill that biological void so that they can feel that they're contributing and, helping in a positive way in this situation?
I mean, I think you can do it in so many ways. One is, be able to contribute financially as well. Maybe it's not 100% like it used to be, but, play your role and do a good job. Have a plan around your career to the best of your ability, right? Second is emotionally, right at home, right? You can fulfill and do things to help, manage your finances. You can love your spouse to the best of your ability, right? You can pour into them emotionally, make them feel valued and needed, and you can get that in return as well. So that emotional side, I think you have to. There's give and take there as well. I mean, and household chores, things like that. That's obviously something you can do. Sitting in the basement playing video games for 8 hours a day is not I'm not saying that that's bad. There's community, there's some talent there, but if you're valuing that over your wife and your job and your kids, then that's where the problems exist. And you can contribute, because if you look at the long game, like you said, we're all put on this earth for a purpose. You want to create that generation of your children for the next children and build them up so that they can have confidence and connection and safety in this world. And you can do those things in amazing ways, and contribute to this world. And every person, they say on your deathbed, you're not going to be thinking about if you worked more hours or if you did this. You're going to think about, your loved ones and your family, right?
That's right.
So pour into them in different ways, with providing, and you do protect it at many levels, emotionally. I protect my wife emotionally all the time, because she can beat herself up sometimes, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, hey, listen to me. Don't listen to what's rattling around in your head, right? Mm-hmm. You are lovely, you're powerful, you're worthy yourself. And she is it. She's one of the most powerful people I know. But having that constant reminder and that love and that safety is probably one of the, the most powerful things I've provided in my life to my family.
Yeah. Great advice for men out there. Thank you for sharing that. And just zooming out a little bit now, because you've been helping and empowering young men for many years now. What are some of the most common things that you find men are coming to you to seek advice for?
There's usually two things. And the first thing they ask about is money. How can I, and I break up money into two things. We just talked about providing, that's making money. How can you earn and then managing the money well. They usually want to talk about how to manage money, right? How can I be safe? How can I plan for the future? How can I make sure that I'm not, super stressed about a rainy day, right? And so you use a lot of the common tools. There's, for those listening, there's nothing in my book that's a unique thought for Jay. It's just curated and put together in a way that makes sense for a man. But there's financial plans to get started off, using things like Dave Ramsey and his 7 baby steps, build an emergency fund so that you're not stressed, if you lose your job or if the water heater goes out or if you need a new set of tires on your car, something like that, right? We're always going to have things that pop up that we don't plan for. So have an emergency fund, right? Pay off all your debt, build a 3 to 6 month emergency fund. The first emergency fund is just $1,000 just to get going so that you have a little bit of spare cash on the side. Then pay off all your debts and then save 3 to 6 months of an emergency fund. And if you do things like that, you can ride the waves of life a little more easy. I've been laid off 3 times in my life, Chad, right? And because we had an emergency fund, our family didn't miss a beat, right? We didn't stress. We didn't have that extraordinary pressure on the family where I would start to act out in different ways and I would be triggered by that incompetence and that unworthiness, right? So I would become a different version of Jay in a bad way, in a very bad way because of the pressure with financial things. So number one, they come to me with asking about how to get going on I'm not a financial planner, but just the generic plan of how to get going. And the second thing right after that, because these are I usually start talking to them in their senior year of college and then we stay together for a couple of years and we have community groups and we check in and we do have that vulnerability. But the second thing they ask about, and this surprised me, Chad, is they ask me about relationship advice. And some of them have read my book, some of them haven't. They know the pressure that I felt when I proposed to my wife. And I didn't know. I didn't want to screw it up. And I find so many men that it's that worthiness. They watch their divorced parents. They've seen train wrecks in relationships and they're like, man, this is such a big decision. I went to counseling when I was, before a year or two, I had a girlfriend in college for 5 years and I didn't know, should we get married or should we not, right? I felt that same pressure. So I can be very empathetic. I don't have answers. We talk about, hey, if you can align around these 4 things, and they're in the book as well, love, a relationship has to be covered. This is the advice I give for relationships for like 25-year-old men. It's got to be covered in love and trust. You have to have those foundational things. Do you want what's best for each other? Do you love each other? Do you support each other? Are you at peace with each other? Or is there a lot of anxiety and agitation? If you don't have those, then you might think about moving on. But if you do have those, then if you can align around these 4 things, the success rate of marriage goes up to like 90%. Can you agree on finances? Are you going to be partners? Do you have a plan? Do you want are you on board with that? Because finances are the biggest friction point in a marriage. And that's why the Bible talks so much about it. Jesus talks a lot about money because it's such a big pain point. So are you going to plan together financially and be on the same page? Second, talk about children. What does your future look like for children? When my wife had cervical cancer when she was in college, we had this conversation before we got married. She didn't know if she could bear children. And we had that conversation. We said, we desperately want a family, but I was like, I'm not going to leave you. If you can't have children, then we'll adopt or we'll find some other path, some other plan, right?
Yeah.
So finances, children, the next one is, they call it the crazies, the in-laws. Can you deal? Every family's got one. If you don't know who it is, it's you. That's what they always say. Like my mom wanted to develop a codependent relationship with me, right? And she did not like me dating. She felt like I was abandoning her, leaving her. So my wife and I had to align around that. And we went to counseling 3 months into our marriage because that was an issue. And we had to talk about it. And we got professional help and we were able to talk through it. My wife is by far the most important relationship in my life. My mother's an important relationship in my life, but, my wife's the most important. Can we deal with the crazies together? And then the final thing is faith. Can you align around a faith journey? And if you can align around those four things, again, if you have this love and trust and you want what's best for each other and you have some peace in your relationship, and that's what a lot of pre-marriage counseling does, is you're able to talk through those things so that you can at least discuss them before you get married and not after and say, whoops, we really weren't aligned on that, right? You want to go to the synagogue and I want to go to the church, or I don't want to go to church at all. That's not important to me. Have those faith conversations before you get married too. So
Yeah.
I didn't think I'd be a relationship advisor, and I give all the disclaimers up front when they call me and ask about these things. But I can very much, I think the help I give them is I empathize with what they feel is the pressure of that situation. And some of it's unworthiness as well.
Definitely. Yeah. So many gems of wisdom in what you just shared. And I'd like to end on this note of faith, because as you say in your book, we all have a God, whether we know it or not. So would you just share a little bit about your faith journey and how people can start implementing that as sort of a guiding force in their life?
Yeah, I do think, like I told you, from a young age, I had a belief in God, in Jesus, and I didn't have an epiphanal moment. It's not like I went into a yearning, a searching, went into a ditch, and found my way out through faith. So I don't have that story to tell, but over time, and I think this really hit me in my 40s, Chad, was I thought about the best things in my life. And, it's my body, it's my desire, it's my talents, it's my, my brain to think about things. It's my wife for sure. It's my kids. It's the love and the relationships and the connection that I have. And all of those best things in my life, that's my faith story. If anybody asks why I'm faithful, I say, all those things you can't go to a store and buy. You can't go to Amazon. You can't create those things. And I view those things as gifts, and those gifts had to come from somewhere. And so I do believe, I don't believe that we're an accident. I don't believe that this world just happened by chance. And not everybody agrees with me. I'm never going to debate anybody into faith. But that's what I chose to do, is to say all these great things, I have to thank somebody, something for these gifts, because that's the gratitude component, right? Of who would I give thanks to for these things? Just chance? Just, hey, I just got lucky, and this, we're just playing house on this earth for 80 years or whatever number of days we're given. And so I've linked into that, right? And I've seen a lot of codependent situations as well, right? There's a Bible verse, a cord of three cannot be broken. And what that means, you got a husband and wife and God. My wife cannot be my God. I've seen men who've grown up with codependence with their mother. And again, my mother tried to do that in some ways as well. And, I think unintentionally, but that was her reaction. That there's got to be a higher power to take you through the tough times, because I know I've wounded my wife. I've failed. I've made mistakes, and she's done the same. So we can't hold each other to these standards that are unattainable as human beings. And that's where the grace comes in of, I think we do need to be graceful. If I could rip out a page of the Bible, it'd be like saying, hey, turn the other cheek, forgive those, who've wronged you. That's a tough one to swallow, right? Mm-hmm. But it's probably the most powerful thing. And again, I think forgiveness moves you out of your head and the logic and, I should get back at them or my spouse, to that forgiveness. And that's the journey I walked through with my father that I explained to you earlier.
Yeah, beautifully said. And I think that's a great note to end on. So before we get into the final two questions that we ask everybody, Where can people find you, Jay, and learn more about any offerings you might have and any coaching?
Yeah, I've got a website, beaheroinyourhome.com. You can find me there. And my book, Be a Hero in Your Home, The Ultimate Playbook for Men to Succeed at Home, Work, and Life is available on Amazon. Go grab it there, and you can find my contact information on my website and reach out to me anytime.
Yeah, and I definitely recommend the book. It is done in an excellent way, very approachable, very relatable, very practical. So definitely check that out. And 2 questions that we ask everybody on this show. The first one is, in the spirit of this being the Supernatural podcast, what is your definition of an extraordinary life?
I think I've said it. Yeah, I think it's being, raising your confidence to the best of your ability, being connected. That's the number one thing. That's the thing they say is the most important factor in longevity. It's not how much money you have. It's not the number of followers you have on social media. It's not, taking the best vacations. It's what kind of real connections and relationships do you have? So, building confidence, creating connection, and doing that in a safe place. Those are the mantras that I think create an extraordinary life.
Amazing. I love it. And if you had one message for humanity at this time as a whole, what would that be?
I love you. I believe in you. I'm proud of you. I mean that. It's pretty simple.
It is simple. Beautifully said. And with that, we're gonna sign off. Jay, thank you so much for coming on the show. I could talk to you for hours and hours and pick your brain. You got so much wisdom to share, and your depth of experience, it really just shines through in your ability to articulate these different concepts and pass them on and have these vulnerable conversations. So thank you for being somebody in the world who men can look up to. And I'm just so appreciative for you being here today.
It's an honor to be here. I'm proud of you for doing this podcast and sharing with the world. Great job.